When one first thinks of an American oval racing series, the very last thing they expect is for the biggest race of the season to be held on a road course in Finland, halfway across the world, near the Russian border, and especially when this race is history. The first Kyella race was in 1977, but it wasn't a Master Cup Series points race. In fact, it wasn't until 1984 that it became a points event. In 1977, the very first race, the cars used were more like touring cars. Master Cup Series driver Arthur Thomas won the exhibition in '77, but it was the only time that an American driver won the exhibition race. Many say that the first non-American driver to win a Master Cup Series race was Alan Hodges. They mean points events because in 1978, Heikki Sorola won in 1978, and after his victory, wasn't paying attention on the victory lap and beached his car on the sandpit on the outside of Turn 4, which has become known as Sorola Park ever since. The entry lists have always been very interesting to look at, and through the 80s the battle was between the American drivers and the Russian drivers. In 1984, Master Cup Series and Russian Touring Car Championship, which was then called the Soviet Touring Car Championship, officials collaborated and created a car that was basically good in both rule books. And therefore, you had many teams that would come straight from Russian Touring Car Championship right over into this race and still be very competitive. However, they never prevailed. Even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they still made many bold runs at it. In fact, the most competitive of those teams, the Katsev Racing team, stopped running in 1995 because of the rising costs. However, Katsev has come back and has actually put one of his cars in the field, a feat that has been marveled at throughout the garage. For this race, and in this era, the big trouble zones are in the Madigan turn, which is turn 3, and up to Sorola Park. In the junior race last year, we saw a big pile-up right in there. In fact, the first 3 turns are considered to be, by me at least, to be the most dangerous on any track in the Master Cup Series, because you see cars going in there 4 or 5 wide because everybody wants to jostle for position and get up towards the front. The most dangerous part of the track, as far as crashing goes, is the Dwyer S, all the way in the back straightaway. Benny Dwyer, I remember, would always go flying through that turn, almost flat out, and not wreck the car. It was named after him for obvious reasons. And also the very final turn, the Mallet Corner. It's a wide sweeper, probably the widest that's on a road circuit that we go to. Named after the chap that worked with Frank and Gerard Madigan to build this racetrack, the original owner of the land. But since it's come under the possession of the Madigans, and they've done quite well, the 24-hour race has been held here, and they're very supportive of European racing. This track is unique in the fact that it is very much in the interests, it very much caters to the interests of motorsport and not necessarily to the big dollars, because there have been many club races held here as well. Many Finnish drivers consider that an advantage when they enter this race. While they may not have the best cars, they're so familiar with the track racing club events here that running here is almost second nature to them. Now on to Dan with the starting grid. The 2009 Karjala Grand Prix starting grid already had many shockers because the highest qualifying American is in row 3. Matthias Taub out of nowhere, a Swedish driver, comes in, qualifies on the pole. Hans Eichel is a current Formula A driver driving for McAllister. Row number 2, Jacques Bouvier, currently leads the TM Lights Points Championship, and Adrien Devereaux is an RRL champion. Durbin and Rainsford will make an interesting combo into turn 1. Arto Kekkonen is the fan favorite to win. Brian Sendak in row 6 thinks he can win the race, but he's not too confident seeing where he qualified. Of course, Julian Asova, always dangerous at this track. Very strong here. Alan Hodges and Kurt Pliskin, those cars could be very fast. Danny Savin, row 15, Julian Alexander. Nobody expected him to even make it through pre-qualifying. Row 17, Milano Rossini, and then there's the Ivan Katsev car with Vladimir Simonov. And all the way back in row 21, you have Mike Whitmore in car number 73. Whitmore won his only race on strategy, and since this race is very much a strategy race, it could play into his hands. That is Matthias Taub in car number 79. This is his Master Cup Series debut, and in the fashion of Arto Kekkonen, he decided he'd make the most of it and get the pole. However, unlike Arto Kakkonen, he didn't have the fastest car in any of the practice sessions. The first turn is always dangerous, and here comes the field. Flying into turn 1. They're already 3 and 4 wide. And here we go, the famous cam on the rumble strips. And there's already trouble, somebody's off, and Hans Eichel sweeps into the lead. There is Wlodarczyk, Palmer Styles, and Leonid Roderick have also gone off. Let's have a look what happens to Styles. He gets pushed out wide, he gets into the tire walls, and that's the end of his race before he even completes a lap. Such things happen here before, have happened here before, and they happen to even the best. Robert Dorian, TM Lights driver, gives Styles a tap, and Styles goes out of the race. Let's see what happens to his more illustrious teammate Roderick. Looks like Roderick got a little bit too aggressive on the first lap. However, Roderick is able to keep the car off the tire walls. Well, almost, just taps it lightly. However, Hans Eichel, a Formula A driver for Danza, isn't so lucky. Coming into the first turn, a very exuberant Adrian Devereaux makes a peek inside and actually turns Eichel around. Right in front of everybody. Chris Johans and Chris Allen both pile in. And here's the twisted irony in that. Johans and Allen, the two cars that took the worst from that, are Eichel's two teammates. So, a very, very disastrous start from McAllister Motorsports right off the bat. Arguably, Devereaux should have been a bit more patient, but, you know, it's a big day for a young man like Devereaux. Pressure probably just got to him, and he ends up turning the 12 car around. The officials weren't too impressed with that, though. Devereaux's been pretty smooth and pretty quick the whole month, but looks like just a little bit more patience could have prevented this. And a couple of cars, including Todd Wlodarczyk, get in here as well. He's right on board with midfield here with Chris Allen. He's way in the back. Excuse me, he's in the back of the field. He's getting around Simov there on his left. There is Johans off in the grass. Todd Wlodarczyk gets turned off the course by his own teammate, Lauren Roth. There's the 12 car, and, oh, Allen almost hasn't made it through, but not quite. Chris Allen's had a bit of a rough season in the Master Cup Series. This is his second full year. He's shown that he has the raw speed to compete in this series, but he just hasn't quite had the luck yet. Up front, Matthias Taub would be flying away with the lead in much the same fashion that Arto Kakkonen did last year. Taub really had nothing to lose at this point. He can just drive it to the wall and drive it balls to the wall and hope that he gets as much out of it as he can, because he's in a car that's reliability is somewhat suspect, but he's going for it, and the crowd is loving it. Even though most of the crowd is from Finland, Taub is from neighboring Sweden, and he was still very well received by the crowd when they saw him flying past them way out in front of Master Cup Series stars as Alexis Rainsford and the like. Here's David Krikorian in the 9 car. Let's have a look at coming through the Dwyer S. Coming through turn 10. Down to 11, you can see they're already 3 wide. Drew Eisenman and Ross Peterson almost wrecking in the back. But Krikorian has also been one of the dark horses, especially since he climbed up very much in the first lap. Climbed up many positions. Nasova and Tony Durbin having a little scrap there. DK is well known for his prowess. Marcus Leonard, on the other hand, hasn't really done so well in the past couple of years. In his first showing here, he scored himself a top 10. However, ever since then, he's really struggled here for whatever reason. Leonard just has not had the luck, but he does have the speed and also has the sort of insane will to do well here. He got damage in the first corner, as I think you can probably see from the hood damage, but you can see how much he's holding up the cars behind him. Dale Roswell, it's driving like a much younger man around him. Scott Stoidler in the 26 car makes a little mistake, runs Mallet a little too wide, finds himself in the wall, and almost into those tires. Stoidler saves his car from wrecking on the first lap, which is all by himself, and continues on. Woody Watts makes an odd move and pits on the end of the first lap along with Chris Allen. Watts a little impatient to get Allen into the pit lane. Matt Taylor started 9th, however, at the end of the lap 1, he comes across the line in 20th, excuse me, just to show how chaotic this first lap can be. Taylor has said that this is probably the hairiest first lap of any track ever seen. Now he even loses another spot, goes to 21st. Chris Johans made a pit stop after the first lap because of all the damage to the front end. He came out without the hood. So much for having a hood for the rest of for more than one lap. Might as well have been for show. Johans has not really had much luck in the Master Cup Series. However, he's done very well, but last season was not very, very good showing for him. Brian Sendak in car number 40 is considered a Karjala specialist. That's why most people say he's been kept in the series as long as he has. because Sendak's performances in the past 2 years haven't been too good. However, at this track, he does exceptionally well. And I guess if you're going to specialize at one track, you might as well specialize at the one circuit where the biggest race of the season is held. Sendak showing that he deserves to stay in this series by competing against the best early on. Another driver to keep an eye on is Danny Savin in the 91 car. He's won this race twice in 03 and 04, even though Lance Anders insists he still won 2004. Of course, that's still a very controversial finish because of what some people think was an electronics error on the 26 car, the car that Anders was driving at the time. Danny beginning to make his way up through the field. However, he's beginning to find it hard to get around cars such as Alan Hodges and Julian Asova. Danny Savin has his teammate Milano Rossini in the race, and many people expected Savin to thrash Rossini mercilessly in this race. However, in practice, it was the other way around. Leonid Roderick in car number 4's little spin-off actually threw him all the way to the back, but he was catching up to Ryan Araki in a rapid clip. Roderick has won this race twice. He and Julian Asova are the only two drivers to have won this race while going for Rookie of the Year. Arto Kakkonen is, without a doubt, the fan favorite to win the race. Arto is hugely popular in Finland, and not without reason. Last year, he qualified a car that was barely expected to make it through qualifying, the pre-qualifying races, and put it on the outside of the front row and led the opening stages of the race. Kakkonen then snagged himself a big ride, proved that he deserved it, and here he is running for Rookie of the Year, and also, many people think, could actually win the race. Arto very much knows this track. He's driven here in what Lance described in the pre-race show and club races and the like. However, to say Arto Kakkonen is the only driver that the Finnish fans are cheering for is arrogance. Mika Sivinen, who you'll see coming here in a blue number 06 car, was also among the fans' favorite. You can see him right there. Sivinen qualified the same car that Arto Kakkonen qualified for last year and put it in the field, but wasn't doing anywhere near as well. Damian Snyder pulled his car into the pits a little earlier than most on lap 5. Matt Taylor in the 49 car decided to follow suit because Matt Taylor did not have a very good start, so he figured to pull it anyway. And Julian Alexander in the 0 followed as well. Alexander's got some damage to that car from contact on the first lap. This is the Ivan Katsev car that we were referring to earlier in the show. Vladimir Simonov is driving this car. Simonov is actually scheduled to drive the Stan Rosenstrutter 38 car for most of the season. However, Rosenstrutter's big performance at Daytona kind of shelved those plans for now. Simonov proving his worth. He did very well in qualifying and was doing well so far. But here's a guy who's still doing extremely well. It's Matthias Taub in car number 79. Big-time underdogs have come to surprise the big show many times, and this is just another example. Taub proving his worth so far here in the woods. Julian Asova, winner of this race a couple years ago, also running very well. Asova's smooth driving technique proving very effective early on in the game. Silva just trying to keep the car on the road, hoping that everything falls her way. Here's pit stops, lap 9, Taub is in. Devereaux and Rainsford are in. Kakkonen is in. Bouvier is in. Duff is in. Scott Bates and Brian Sendak are staying out. Nasova has come in. Krikorian, Salvin, Hodges. Peterson has stayed out. Roth has stayed out. Of course, Lauren Roth, the defending winner of this race. Dale Roswell has come in. Simonov is in. Rossini, Darshik, Kingston, and Naraki. And this is the race leader now, Brian Sendak in car number 40. Of course, Sendak thinks he has a shot to win this race, but didn't really put too much stock in those chances because of where he qualified. Brian, a former MotoGP rider, former motocross Grand Prix rider. This is Zelda Ashby in the 55 car, not had too much success, except on these road courses where Ashby, of course, won Estoril, sort of by surprise. Ashby is running third. Tony Durbin is running fourth. Durbin not known for his road course prowess. But these two cars haven't pitted yet, so we'll see where they cycle out. Here's Jacques Bouvier getting snipered by Milano Rossini. Bouvier picked up last-minute backing from Lennard Motor Company because he qualified for this race in Ralph Zimmerman's car. This is a German team that normally runs touring cars in Europe. But Jacques Bouvier is a French driver who's running the Team Light Series and is doing extremely well. Bouvier is leading the point standings in the Team Lights as of right now. That is Todd Wodarczyk directly behind him. However, we had incidents coming, and they happened on lap 9. David Krikorian and Mike Whitmore battling for position. Krikorian gets a bit too aggressive, taps Mike Whitmore, and Mike Whitmore finds himself trying to build sandcastle. Whitmore get that car beached, and it would take a little assistance to get him out of there. However, that wasn't all. Jacques Bouvier's bad pit stop went from bad to worse. Todd Wodarczyk gets into the back of the Frenchman and sends him into the wall and out of the race. Wodarczyk would not necessarily become Bouvier's favorite driver after this race, needless to say. A great effort so far from Bouvier, however, it all goes to naught after he gets punted off the track cruelly early on in the going. Here we got some interesting racing here with Hans Eichel and Marcus Leonard going, I believe, a lap down. Ryan Naraki and, Leonard's still in the lead lap, going through the trees. Hans Eichel's holding up traffic just a little bit, but his day hasn't really been the same. Eichel has expressed some interest in running this series on some of the oval circuits, and he typically runs about midfield in Formula A as it is. And here's Matthias Taub. His lead after the pit stops has been reduced a little bit. Alexis Rainsford was able to gain a little bit on him on the track. See Taub actually trying to block her a little bit, going over to the right. Going to see Alexis Rainsford not terribly impressed with all that. She runs the turn a little wide, and Taub goes out just a little bit. In fact, Rainsford pinches him over towards the grass just a little bit more. You can see how much ground Taub loses, and Arto Kekkonen begins to make his presence known. Kekkonen gaining a bunch of time with adjustments that he made to his race car, something that Taub is not used to doing. Zach Duff was not regarded too highly coming into this season. However, he was beginning to put all those rumors to rest because he's running 4th. A very impressive showing from the second-year driver who last year was running the junior race here and wasn't even close to the front of the field at that time. Duff has finally got some confidence in this car, and he's running extraordinarily well. Here's a couple other drivers running very well. Matt Taylor gained a bunch of spots back in the pits. Here comes Julian Nasova on the inside of him coming into turn 8, my bad. And here comes Brian Sendak around, and here they come towards the Dwyer S. This is Devereaux is 5th, Nasova 6th. Back up front with Alexis Rainsford. Boy, this is a novel concept. Alexis Rainsford leading at a road course. Whenever this has happened, she's been untouchable. One thing we haven't seen in many years is cars to actually be changing brake pads during the middle of a race, and this could very much become part of the strategy of all the cars out here, because this race is 51 laps as opposed to the race distance in recent years, which has been about 25 or 35. Here's a little bit of almost wrecking. Gary Edwards into the back of Scott Stoidler, the 26, who's becoming a bit of a nuisance today. Stoidler ran himself off the track and mallet on the first lap. And there'd be incidents on lap 11. See Matt Taylor in the 49 car here. He's been a little slow on the track. Danny Sobin gets around him. David Krikorian decides that Taylor's not going fast enough and throws him off the track. Krikorian just is able to keep it going through the sand traps. However, Matt Taylor is not terribly impressed with that. Here's one more look at it. Maybe DK was being a little too exuberant, but Taylor was a bit slow, so DK probably could have used a bit of patience, and that would have solved Krikorian from running the 49 car basically off in sand. Alexis Rainsford began to pull away from Taub and Arto Kekkonen. Not too much of a surprise, seeing as once we see Alexis Rainsford out this far on a road circuit, she's almost unassailable. However, this race has been a bit random in the past, so who knows? Maybe with the scheduled brake pad changes that this could get a little interesting. Well, an incident happened on lap 15. Alan Hodges and Scott Bates are having a pretty exciting battle in the midfield. However, they got a little too close to each other, and Bates and Hodges ran each other off the track in turn 6. And then DK runs into the back of Alan Hodges for really no reason, Krikorian being a bit of a wrecker today, and that's unusual. Here we see Vladimir Simonov. We're going to see there's the wreck happening in front of him. There's Krikorian running into the 13, and there's Simonov running himself off the track by running into DK. However, Vladimir Simonov did not fret, because as I mentioned earlier, most cars are going to be having to change. In fact, every single car is going to have to change brake pads once throughout this race, and that's about a 7-minute job. Here comes Brian Sendak and Adrian Devereaux leading the second charge into pit road. Sendak running a very short second stint. Vladimir Simonov's team had an interesting plan up their sleeve as Matthias Taub and Alexis Rainsford and the rest of the leaders make their stops. Vladimir Simonov's team elected not to make brake pad changes on this stop, where everyone else was. About lap 15 or 16, everyone was making their mandatory brake pad stops. When I say mandatory, I mean unless you don't want your car's brakes shattering. Matthias Taub was dropping several positions after this pit stop because, well, some people thought he was using his equipment up too much, and then again, Taub's inexperience meant he wouldn't know how to make adjustments to the car. Arto Kekkonen and Alexis Rainsford were second and third coming out of the stops. However, third and fourth, because Mike Whitmore would be running in second, because Whitmore decided to take a page out of the Vladimir Simonov book, and the 73 team elected not to change brake pads and stick with the 59 car. Whitmore counting on Vladimir Simonov's strategy working in order to get himself a good finish. Not necessarily a winning plan for Whitmore. More trouble on lap 19. This with Leonid Roderick and Ryan Naraki. Coming into turn 5, Naraki does the same thing that Roderick that Wodarczyk did to Jacques Bouvier, punts him off the track, racing a little too hard for that position, and Gary Edwards, hello! Roderick not paying attention there and almost taking Gary Edwards with him. However, to be fair to Roderick, he really didn't have much other choice there. Mika Sivonen in car number 06 made up a lot of time in the pits and was making his way towards the front. You see him right behind Alexis Rainsford. That's for position. Sivonen has marched his way all the way up to 4th, and a fantastic job so far for the Finnish driver. This team has been really gambling on pit strategy, and it's been paying off. Vladimir Simonov's strategy, although interesting not to change brake pads early on, he decided this team would change later in the race. Hoped to get as big a lead as possible. 7 minutes to change brake pads for everyone else would put Vladimir Simonov 1 lap in front of the pack. This is a very, very not something that the Master Cup Series is used to seeing. One car, 1 lap in front of the rest of the field, except for Michael Whitmore, was the only other car in the lead lap. Whitmore still running a very quiet second place. He wasn't exactly the quickest car on the racetrack. However, Whitmore is trying to utilize a bit of strategy in order to get himself a better finish, something he is notorious for doing. Here is Mika Sivonen and Alexis Rainsford having an interesting battle for third here. Sivonen and Rainsford coming up towards Mallet, and Sivonen loses the back end of the car a little bit. The tree obscured the view. We'll have another look at that, a better look, hopefully. And Alexis Rainsford takes third position right back. Here we have another look at it. Sivonen makes a dive. He actually has the pass almost completed here, and if he's able to keep the car going, he would have had it, but no, the car almost steps out from under him, and Rainsford's able to sweep back in. Still fantastic driving from both drivers, and this would keep interest up, as well as see what would happen to the 59 and 73 cars. Mike Whitmore, however, would bite the bullet and change brake pads right about the halfway point, keeping him well in the pit lane for quite some time. Mika Sivonen in the 06 car would pit 1 lap after the 73 car did, Sivonen using Mike Whitmore's car as a gauge of some sort. An incident happened on lap 26. More trouble on the racetrack. Lewis Kingston is entering his pit lane. Very clean entry into pit road. And then, hello, Lewis Kingston. Rachel Rainsford decides to slam into the back of him for no reason at all, apparently, other than that Rachel Rainsford forgot to use the brakes. The officials weren't too pleased with that, and Rachel Rainsford was asked to see them after the race. The other Rainsford made it onto the pit road very cleanly on lap 27. Car 27 in on lap 27. Arto Kekkonen followed suit in the number 14 launch car. Kekkonen still very much in the hunt to win this race if Simonov's pit strategy goes all wrong, and Zach Duff still quietly hanging around inside the top spots. Simonov decided to stay out a little longer than everybody else, trying to see how much fuel he could gain. And with his brake pad still a little bit approaching the about to die area, this proved problematic for some other people, though. Mika Sivonen in the 06 car merges right in front of Scott Stoidler and throws both cars off the track. Scott Stoidler wouldn't be too impressed with that. However, Mika Sivonen and the fans weren't too impressed with Scott Stoidler. Sivonen would be out of the race, his car thoroughly beached and thoroughly done. However, Vladimir Simonov had some lap traffic to contend with that was quicker than him. Of course, when your brakes aren't as responsive, they tend to not slow you down as quickly, meaning you're going to be slower around the track because you're going to have to use less throttle. Here comes Adrian Devereaux, Matthias Taub, and Tony Durbin in the 33 car. Taub in the black 79 car, still running a bit wide. Tony Durbin runs Simov a little bit wide. Durbin not being very courteous in the road right now. And Taub gets into the 59, and Simov goes into the wall. Oh boy, this would be a big heartbreak for a very interesting pit strategy that might have actually worked. The car that was one lap ahead of the entire pack just got taken out by Matthias Taub. Simonov and the Ivan Katsev team would not be too impressed. Alexis Rainsford would resume the lead. This is a running order at lap 31. You see Duff is still sitting in fourth. Julian Osova leapfrogged Duff in the pits. Brian Sendak and Ashby having a very interesting battle for fifth and sixth. Should keep an eye on Adrian Devereaux. Matthias Taub is probably not going to be the most popular person leading. Milano Rossini, very strong run from him so far. Stephanie McGlynn and Lewis Kingston having quiet runs. Ross Peterson still running quietly in 22nd, not as high as we would have expected. Robert Dorian, the British driver, having a decent run for himself. Hans Eichel has actually worked his way back on the lead lap after that incident in the first lap. Woody Watts is the last car on the lead lap. 5 cars are out. Simonov, Sivinen, Roderick, Bouvier, and Stiles, all from accidents. Speaking of Milano Rossini, this is a run that not too many people expected of him. I mentioned before that the expectations for Rossini were to get smashed by Danny Savin, especially here because Danny Savin is very good at Karjala. However, Milano Rossini was beginning to stand the world on their heads because on the race they expected him not to qualify. He qualifies. And when they expected Savin to totally thrash him in all the practice sessions, it turns out that Rossini is actually keeping pace with his teammate. So it could be that Volpe's connections were very well suited for Rossini because he is showing today that he deserves to be in this series. Arto Kakkonen is also showing that he deserves to be in this series and that he also deserves to contend for the win because it became clear that Kakkonen and Alexis Rainsford were far ahead of the rest of the pack. Third and fourth would be Zach Duff and Julian Osova, this being a very interesting battle between two teammates. Of course, these two teammates at the Jeff Sesnick Racing team. Of course, that team might be bought out by the Volpe Motor Company, making this a Works Volpe team. Should be sort of interesting to see since we haven't really had a Works team in this series for some time, although the National Racing Team is basically a Works Star team. There's the battle for 5th and 6th between Brian Sendak in the 40, Zelda Ashby in the 55. These two would be going at it, swapping positions very often, much to the enjoyment of the crowd here. Brian Sendak's never give up attitude, along with Ashby's. Well, we had more trouble in lap 34, and these between two drivers that have already been causing trouble today. Rachel Rainsford and Scott Stoidler. Stoidler turns Rainsford into the tire walls. Interestingly enough, Rachel Rainsford crashed out of this race last year by running into those same tire walls. See Chris Johans going very wide to miss him, and Lewis Kingston almost wrecking his car, trying to miss this as well. The other Rainsford, Alexis, was being caught by Arto Kakkonen. This is something the fans were keeping much attention to because Kakkonen, very much quicker than Alexis Rainsford on older tires on the racetrack. Julian Osova would be running in third very quietly, having gotten around Zach Duff and some lap traffic giving her a big advantage over Duff. Well, guess what? Brian Sendak's gotten around Zelda Ashby again. What do you think Ashby's going to do about that? She's going to say, I want my 5th place back. Actually gets into the back of the 40 car and is bump drafting him all the way down the straightaway. This is something you don't normally see at road course. In fact, Master Cup Series cars very seldom bump draft because, well, the front nose of these cars is lower than the rear end. If you bump into the back of somebody, you spin them out, basically. Ashby not afraid to give Brian Sendak a little bit of bump just to show him around, and Sendak, well, runs Ashby a bit wide there as retaliation. More trouble on lap 36 of 51. Tony Durbin and Woody Watts. Durbin would be coming into the pits. Watts gets into him, then Tony Durbin does that. I'm not sure what that's all about. I have a feeling Tony Durbin was trying to wreck Woody Watts' car, but it just didn't work. And Durbin ended up running himself into the wall, and he saw the leaders go by to put him a lap down. Here's another look at this. Durbin was scheduled to come in this lap. He moves down the track. Woody Watts gets into the back of him, starts bumping into him, and Durbin, if he was going to make an urge to wreck Watts, he should have done it a little earlier because it was obviously way too late. More trouble happened on lap 40. right after everyone had made their pit stops. This is between Lewis Kingston and Marcus Leonard. This is the best camera we can get for this, so apologies for that. Kingston gets into the back of Marcus Leonard, and then coming into Mallet, they both lose it simultaneously. Synchronized spinning between Kingston and Leonard. Looks like Kingston may have gotten into the side of the 0-2 car just a little bit, and that sent both of them right around. On the pit lane, Alexis Rainsford had problems getting around Todd Wodarchik's car, and so she had decided she wasn't too fond of that and ran into his front left corner. Handed her a slight pit penalty that which put Arto Kekkonen in the lead of the race. With just 11 laps to go, Arto Kekkonen would be leading again at Karjala. Having snaked around Alexis Rainsford, here's Lauren Roth, the defending winner of this race. He hasn't really been doing too well the entire day. Roth in car 39, trying to work his way around Julian Alexander in the 0. Alexander, of course, an RROL driver who hasn't done too well this year either. And they touch, they make contact with Damian Snyder, and Roth throws his car into the tire wall, along with Alexander's car. So Lauren Roth on lap 44 makes a big nuisance of himself, something that he did not expect to do. In fact, I don't think anyone would have expected him to do. Lap traffic came into play as Arto Kekkonen was held up by Woody Watts. Alexis Rainsford set the fastest lap of the event. However, Tony Durbin came into play, and we all know how much Tony Durbin and Alexis Rainsford get along. Get along like cats and dogs. But regardless, Tony Durbin would be holding up Alexis Rainsford's car, even though Durbin was a lap down. He would cost Alexis Rainsford about half a second on Arto Kekkonen just by holding her up and letting Arto get away. However, Arto in the meantime was having problems with Woody Watts. Rainsford got around Durbin, got around Watts, and proceeded to chase down Arto Kekkonen, but she just ran out of time. Arto Kekkonen winning the Karjala Grand Prix in his second attempt. However, he's running for Rookie of the Year. So a rookie wins the race. Well, a Master Cup Series rookie wins the race. So hard to classify this as a rookie winning, but regardless, it's the first win for a Finnish driver on home soil, and the first win for Arto Kekkonen in his Master Cup Series career. Alexis Rainsford second, Julian Asova third, Zach Duff, how about that, fourth place. Brian Sendak, Zelda Ashby, as we go through the finishing order. Drew Eisenman, very much an underdog performance. He ran a very cool and collected race. So did Dale Roswell. Milano Rossini, how about that? Way to shut up the critics. Stuart Sandoval, Matthias Taub, how about that for Taub? Kurt Pliskin, I believe this was his first start in this race, finishes 14th. Pliskin can drive. Alan Hodges, 17th. He still has not won this race. Scott Bates, a frustrating 23rd for that team, but I'm pretty sure they'll take it regardless. Woody Watts and Marcus Leonard, frustrating days for them. Scott Storler and Todd Wodarchik were all over the place. David Krikorian finishes 2 laps down. Not too many people are going to be happy with him leaving today. And of course, Vladimir Simonov, he had a strategy that might have worked, but the key word, might have.